Let me give you now a strong case. Mark, Matthew, Luke, Acts are written before 70 AD. And the only reason why you would place them later is because you're stubborn and don't want to affirm the historical accuracy of the Bible and that there's a God who can tell you the future before it happens. Luke ends his discussion in Acts 28 with Paul at Rome under house arrest, though he's got freedom to have guests coming to him, waiting his trial before Caesar, right? That's how he ends it in Acts 28, right? You with me?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, follow, because you got to respond, because I don't read your heart. I know you think I'm supernatural, but I don't read your heart, okay? Okay, so the entire climax of Acts is Paul going before Caesar, but we're not told what happened. He ends it with him still under house arrest. So, number one, if Luke was writing after Paul's encounter with Caesar, we'd expect that he'd mention Paul went before Caesar, because he mentions Paul talking to Felix and Festus and preaching to them. Well, the most powerful person at the time is the emperor. The last thing Luke would admit is what Paul said to the emperor Caesar about Jesus, right?
Yeah, I remember you once.
But he leaves us hanging, and he doesn't even tell us. Then was he set free? We don't even know. Did he go to Caesar? Was he killed, or was he set free? Secondly, Luke's main characters in the book are Peter and Paul. First 9 chapters is about Peter. Then the rest is about Paul. Okay, these two are the main characters of the book. Okay, focus with me. He also mentions James as the leader of Jerusalem, Acts 15. Okay. Now, Luke mentions Stephen being the first martyr. He also mentions James, the brother of John, being killed by Herod, Acts 12, 1 and 2. But now, the main characters of the book, Peter and Paul, not a single word about them being killed or about them dying. If he's writing after 70 AD, we know from church history, Peter and Paul were killed in the 60s. And yet Luke doesn't mention their deaths, the main characters of his book. But he mentions the death of Stephen and James, the brother of John. But he wouldn't mention how Peter and Paul died if he's writing after the fact. Thirdly, we're told by Eusebius, who's quoting Hegesippus, that James, the Lord's brother, mentioned by Josephus, by the way, which is ironic. Josephus, writing in the 90s, mentions that James, the Lord's brother, was thrown off the pinnacle of the temple. When he landed, he was stoned and clubbed to death. If Luke was writing after James was killed, then we would expect him to mention James' death. And due to the chronology, people date James' death to around 62 AD. And if you read Hegesippus, he's quoted in Eusebius, or even Josephus, James was killed because he talked about the Son of Man coming down to destroy the place. And so he's thrown off the pinnacle, clubbed and stoned, and he died. 62 AD. If Luke is written after 70 AD, then why doesn't he mention the death of James and why he was killed? Because he's also an important character. So 3 important characters, he doesn't mention their deaths. Okay. Moreover, since Luke records that Jesus prophesied destruction of the temple, what better thing to do than to mention its fulfillment? Right? Look, Jesus announced it, fulfilled. He doesn't mention that. Do you know why?
Because it didn't happen yet. That's basically
exactly. That means Luke must have been written before 62 AD, before James was martyred, before Peter was martyred, before Paul was martyred, before the temple was destroyed. Okay, now if Luke is written before 62 AD, and that's Acts, that means the gospel is written before Acts. So now you push Luke and Acts at the beginning of 60, maybe even the 50s. But then Matthew and Mark are written before Luke and Acts. So now you just pushed Matthew and Mark in the 50s, if not even the 40s.
And also,
now let me give you an evidence that Mark was written probably even the 40s. Okay.
And
if you go to Mark 14, go to Mark 14, 60 to 64, Mark says the high priest condemned Jesus, but he doesn't tell you the name of the high priest.
Yes, and that's another one, right? Because I
you,
remember you
right?
said this.
How do we know it's Caiaphas?
Say again?
How do we know it's Caiaphas? Because he doesn't tell you it's Caiaphas, right?
Yes, it doesn't tell us because John tells us, right?
and Matthew and Luke. That means Matthew and Luke, they're written early, but late enough they have to tell you who the high priest was. Mark is written even earlier, where he doesn't need to tell you because the people he's writing to know who the high priest is, Caiaphas, because Caiaphas reigned from 18 to 37 AD. In other words, here, let me give you an example. If I were to write to you and saying, the president has destroyed the economy because he's jacked up inflation. Now, you're going to know which president I'm talking about if you're in America, right?
Yeah.
Who would that be, Ed?
Biden, basically.
Okay, but what if 40 years from now, someone's writing about the economy during Biden's reign? He can't say president, right? Because there'd be a new president. So he'd have to say President Biden, right?
Yeah, it would be confusing because maybe Trump might be doing after Biden. Yeah.
That means Mark is written early enough where he knows his audience already know who the high priest is, Caiaphas. He doesn't mention it. Matthew and Luke, though early, they must have been written a little later to an audience that may not have known it's Caiaphas, so they mention Caiaphas by name. Right? Yeah. So now I've given you strong internal evidence. Mark, Matthew, Luke, and Acts, all written before 60, in the 50s, if not the 40s.